Yes, this is report of investigation, smuggling, file titled Grigg and Timothy et al. 5986. Michael Cuniff. It's the debriefing of T.K. Kavanaugh. Synopsis. On March 19, 1986, Charles Stevens and Michael Kavanaugh debriefed TK at the Sheridan Inn in South Portland, Maine. TK advised of his involvement in 13 smuggling ventures between 1975 and 1983. TK reviewed this debriefing and made some changes from the original debriefing. Drug-related information. In 1975 or 1976, TK transported 1,200 pounds of marijuana from Tacunga, Colombia by a Grand Banks fishing schooner, the Bahamas. The location where the marijuana was delivered was called North of West End, which is located adjacent to West Palm Beach, Florida. The marijuana was for Michael, last name unknown, from California. The marijuana was discovered by a fisherman and lost. The crew of the Grand Banks fishing schooner was Michael, last name unknown, from California, Susan, last name unknown, from Kansas, TK, and Jean Kenny, TK's former wife. In 1977, TK transported 2,800 pounds of poor quality marijuana from Guajira, Colombia to Block Island, Rhode Island. The marijuana was offloaded onto a sport fisherman, then transported to Long Island, New York. Gary Ruley purchased a converted Coast Guard buoy tender for the trip to Colombia. The boat crew consisted of Ted, last name unknown, black male; Graham, last name unknown, from Florida; Gary Ruley, girlfriend of Gary Ruley; and TK. John Dickinson, the Panther, did most of the coordination for this load. Dickinson was a roommate of Jeffrey Beal from Florida and TK during this period. The offload was at sea to a boat captained by first name unknown Beauregard from Long Island. Crew of the offload boat were Beauregard, Billy Jacobs, and TK. The offload was by a small fork of Rhode Island or thereabouts. The crew was from Long Island and consisted of John Dickinson, Fu, TK, and others that he can't recall. The marijuana went to a stash house run by Fu. John Dickinson distributed some of the marijuana to Nick Kalis from Massachusetts. The quality was very poor and moved slowly. TK made about $10,000 to $15,000 and cannot recall how he got paid. TK does recall the money came from Dickinson's collections. About 1978, John Davis purchased a yawl and sailed from West Palm Beach to Guajira, Colombia. The crew consisted of TK, John Davis, aka Bama from Alabama, Billy Jacobs, Doug Long from Florida. The Colombian source was an Indian from Camarones, Colombia. They loaded about 4,000 pounds of marijuana and transported it to Gulf Shores or Dolphin Island. The offload crew was John Dickinson, Jeffrey Beal, Benjamin Davis, John's brother, and Carol Davis, Ben's Ben's wife. John Dickinson may have made some arrangements with Nick Kalis for distribution of the load. John Davis handled the rest of the load. TK does not who he delivered it to. TK received about $15,000 from the load, maybe from John Dickinson, but probably from the proceeds of the load. In 1979, the sailboat Harmony, owned by John Walsh, a.k.a. JJ, sailed from West Palm Beach, Florida to Guajira, Colombia. TK was introduced to John Walsh by Foo and Panther. The boat crew consisted of George, last name unknown, boat captain from New York, Billy Jacobs, TK, and possibly Doug Long. The boat was loaded with roughly 11,500 pounds from the same Indian as load number 3. The boat sailed to Owl's Head, Maine. John Walsh had a house with a nearby dock. There was a hill up from the dock. The offload crew consisted of John Walsh, Beauregard, possibly Jeff Beal, Panther, John Dickinson. Others can't recall. The distribution was handled by John Walsh. TK was paid about $25,000 and can't remember the details of payment. In 1979, TK purchased a 30-foot Fisher sailboat, Antigua, with the profits from load number 4. TK's other associates, TK met Enrique Caballeros alone in his house in Santa Marta. Enrique Caballeros is a bona fide politician on a local level. His father was a senator, and Caballero possibly later became a national politician. TK and Caballero reached an agreement for about 2,800 pounds with a down payment of about $2 a pound and a $100 pound later after the marijuana was sold. TK stayed in Colombia while the marijuana was being shipped and later came up to help with the offload. Antonio, Enrique's brother, was present during TK's stay in Colombia and was involved in part of the arrangements after the first meeting. The crew consisted of Knight Barton and Barton's girlfriend. The offload involved a small power boat off Fisher Island next to Long Island. The load was taken to Jackie Knowles' rented house, where she and her husband, Bob, distributed the marijuana from Jackie Knowles and TK former girlfriend, who TK met in Connecticut in 1975. Knight Barton distributed part of the load. The offload crew was Timothy Grigg, Bob, Jackie Knowles' husband, and Jackie Knowles. TK made about $100,000, which he received from Jackie Knowles and Knight Barton. TK paid Enrique Caballeros or Antonio, Enrique's brother, possibly in Vickers Cafe in Manhattan. TK is not sure which he paid. In 1978 or 1979 or 1980, TK purchased a 30-foot Gulf Star boat in Antigua with the proceeds from previous deals. TK used the Gulf Star 50 and the 30-foot Fisherman in this venture. TK met Enrique Caballero in Colombia and reached an agreement to purchase roughly 7,500 pounds of marijuana. The deal was $2 or $3 a pound down, and then pay about $100 to $120 after delivery to offset the comparatively small down payment. The marijuana was loaded in Santa Marta, Colombia, onto two boats with 5,000 pounds on the Gulf Star 50 and 2,500 pounds on the 30-foot Fisherman. The crew of the Fisherman was Knight Barton and his girlfriend. The crew of the Gulf Star 50 was Cecil Hector from Antigua, Larry Waring from Long Island, Dave Atkin may have been killed in a later deal. The offload was a Long Island near Shelter Island. Some went into small boats. Danny Locastro worked with Jack Rule on the distribution during the course of the deal. T.O. Browning was with Locastro and Rule, then known his involvement in the deal. T.O. was very upset because he wasn't involved in the deal. Jackie Knoll and her husband had a truck at the offload and took 1,500 pounds. TK later heard that Willie Zimmerly was Jackie Knoll's outlet for some of the marijuana. Knight Barton got some of the load. He was working with Finnegan, who was killed later in an auto accident. Anna Porter also had a stash house in Connecticut, which was used. The offload crew involved TK, George Schultesis, local of Long Island, Timothy Grigg, Jack Rule, Danny Locastro, others unknown. The offload site was arranged by George Schultesis. One of the small boats went to Danny Locastro's place in Sag Harbor. TK made about $200,000 from the proceeds. TK paid Enrique by dropping the money off in Queens to one of Enrique's associates. In 1979, possibly before number 6, TK made arrangements with Enrique Caballero about the same as before, with a small down payment and then payment in full amount later after the load was sold. TK met Rick Smith in Antigua. Also, TK saw Rick Smith during this visit to Colombia. TK paid Rick Smith for an introduction to Bobby Kenny. There was only about 8,000 pounds available at this time. The boat was the Harmony with a crew of Knight Barton, Cecil Hector, Monroe Perry, a.k.a. Natty from Antigua. The marijuana was loaded and transported to Owl's Head, Maine. Timothy Grigg made arrangements in Maine while TK was in Colombia. Timothy Grigg made arrangement with Bobby Kenny, Jack Baines, and Bob Baines' brothers. The Baines brothers had a boat which was used to offload the marijuana. TK met the Baines brothers sometime during TK's visits to Maine. Knight Barton handled the trucking and distribution with Finnegan. Finneran. Jackie Knoll received some of the load. John Walsh rented the boat. The offload crew was TK, Timmy Grigg, Bob Baines, and Jack Baines. The marijuana quality was poor. The money details were not clear in this deal, and TK can't recall what he got paid. TK paid Enriquez Caballero at Victor's Cafe in Manhattan or the Waldorf in New York. In early 1980, TK met with Enrique Caballero in Mexico. Enrique wanted more money down and said TK owed money from before. This deal involved about 20,000 pounds of marijuana. The marijuana was supposed to be in Maine before Christmas. David Werkele went to Colombia with TK and found the marijuana was not ready. Werkele was to pilot the boat, and when he found the boat was not ready, he returned to Maine. TK met Rick Smith in Colombia on another deal, which TK had no connection. Dave Atkin was captain of the boat. The boat was in poor condition, and the load went as far as Antigua. TK made arrangements with Bobby Kenny, Timothy Grigg, and Werkele to get a second boat to meet the Colombian boat. The Colombian boat took about 40 days before meeting the second boat. TK made arrangements for fuel and provisions for the boat. TK met with Rafael, a friend of Enrique Caballeros in San Martin. The load was transferred to the second boat and headed north. The crew was Billy Smith, David Werkele, one or two other crew. TK received a call from Timmy Brigg about something being strange. TK called Timmy Brigg about the offload and heard about the guns and the broken arm. TK went to Colombia to talk to Enrique Caballeros about the problems. Enrique advised TK he was out of the deal. TK then sold the Gulf Star 50 and paid some of the people who worked for TK in the deal. In 1980, John Dickinson asked if TK wanted to invest in a hash deal. TK went to Singapore with about 30,000 and met Dickinson with Gary Ruley. The first contact with John Dickinson was in New York City. TK asked Timmy Rigg to get involved in some way. John Dickinson had a converted minesweeper and crew in Singapore. TK went to Maine and introduced John Dickinson to Bob Kenny. Bobby Kenny agreed to handle to the offload in Maine. TK was out of the picture. Then the Mary Ann O was used by David Werkele and others in Maine to meet the minesweeper for the offload. TK didn't get much return on his money. He can't recall how much. In 1981, met John Dickinson in New York and advised in a hash deal. Bobby Kenny, Timmy Rigg, and David Werkele were there. Timothy Grigg agreed to handle the offload site. The boat was the Marianne O. John Dickinson was arrested because he was a fugitive. The stash house was in Long Island. TK met with Timmy Grigg, Dave Werkele, and Bob Kennedy at a motel in Braintree, Massachusetts. The motel is across Route 128 from shopping center. They discussed being paid. TK made contact with John Dickinson through Neva Starr, a friend who went to visit Dickinson in jail. Dickinson gave Starr a telephone number for TK to call. The telephone number was the stash house in the 516 area code. The stash house keeper answered and advised TK to bring a truck and they would load it. The hash was given instead of money. TK and Bob, Jackie's husband, took a truck to a location where someone took the truck from them and loaded about 1,000 pounds of hash into it and returned it to TK. TK and Bob took the truck to Jackie's house and put it into the garage. Dave Werkele and another person came and took some of the stuff. The hash was bad and unsellable, and some had to be destroyed. TK lost money on the deal. In 1982, met with Bill Wilhelm in New York and discussed a deal involving 3 boats with about 4,000 pounds of marijuana per boat. The marijuana, TK believed, came from Colombia and came into the Maine coast. Note, Bill Wilhelm, also known as Wilhelm Wright, is possibly a fugitive from the Zimmerly case in Connecticut. Other individuals involved in the deal were Graham Finch's girlfriend, Jack Baines, Bob Baines, Manny, Nelson, Pierre. Graham Finch agreed to help in the offload and had the stash house off Penobscot Bay in Maine. Finch's girlfriend assisted in the deal. TK contacted Bob and Jack Baines for part of the offload in Owl's Head. Wilhelm contracted the other boat crew and offload people. Pierre and Nelson handled the offload in the Booth Bay area. TK and Nelson in the Bahamas on some previous deal. TK was at the motel in Camden when the offload went down. Wilhelm, Manny, and Graham Finch were at the motel but left before the offload. Everything went smoothly, and TK was paid about $80,000 later in New York by Wilhelm. In 1981-82, possibly before number 11, Free from Long Island contacted TK in San Martin. Free had arranged to bring 24,000 pounds of marijuana from Colombia to San Martin. Free wanted TK to transport the marijuana into the United States. TK agreed to find a boat for shipping to no avail. The sailboat Harmony, owned by John Walsh, was used. David and another person loaded the boat in San Martin and transported the marijuana to the same island off Green Turtle Island. Individuals involved were Gil Free, John Walsh, a.k.a. JJ, David, friend of Free. The marijuana was then transported by smaller boats into the United States. Some of the small boats were lost while transporting into the U.S. coast. TK met Nelson in the islands during this deal. Nelson used to hang around the islands during the winter months. TK made about $25,000 and was paid by Free in New York City. In 1983, T.O. Browning contacted TK about an offload brokerage. T.O. Browning had 5,000 or 6,000 pounds of marijuana he wanted shipped into the United States. TK found a black schooner in San Martin. T.O. Browning told TK that he planned to have the black schooner meet the Colombian boat near St. Kitts or Dominique. TK told T.O. Browning that he would be at the meeting if needed. TK did not make the rendezvous between the Colombian ship and the black schooner. John was the owner of the black schooner. TK waited in Connecticut or New Jersey to hear from T.O. Browning that the schooner had headed north. TK then introduced T.O. Browning to Bob Baines by telephone. TK assumes T.O. Browning and Bob Baines met and discussed the offload. T.O. Browning advised TK by telephone that the load came in safely. T.O. Browning paid TK $100,000 in motel in Portland. TK flew to Portland, and T.O. Browning picked him up and took him to the motel, then took him back to the airport. TK thinks the motel could be the Holiday Inn at exit 8.